Hello, my name is LaShawn, and I am the founder of Let's Get Social. And we are here because we're going to be sewing live Simplicity 9757. So I'm excited to sew this. This is a really quick sew, very beginner friendly. So let's get into it. We're going to go to doing the stitching the top. And so there are several different parts to the top. Still easy, but a little bit more involved than with the skirt. So we're going to start with our front, or sorry, our front piece, which is piece number 3. And the first thing that we're going to do is we are actually going to create a reinforcement stitch along the neckline. And so I did not transfer that marking, so I'm going to transfer that now. And you're going to do this reinforcement stitch on the front and the back. And so I'm just transferring this. And you're going to do that reinforcement stitch, and then you're going to make a clip or cut, not through the stitch, but to the stitch. So I am just creating this on both sides. And it does kind of transfer. Okay. And while I'm here, let me just also transfer a couple of other markings that I see that I missed, because these are helpful. They help you line up when you are attaching the front to the back. And I'm going to do it on the other side as well. The one thing I would say about this invisible or air soluble or water soluble marker is that if you use an iron with steam, it will erase these markings. So just have some awareness of that, because you'll be looking for your markings and they'll be gone. So just know. Okay, there we go. That is done on piece number 3, which is the front. And now we are going to go back to a straight stitch. We're going to stitch these in. And I'm going to kind of hand wheel my needle down to make sure that I'm right in the right area I should be in. And then hand stitch again with that foot, and to make a turn, because you're kind of stitching an L. Like that. Thread, and again, we're done. We stitch that little L, and then you're going to again cut to, but not through. Make a little bit of a little more of a cut. All right, there we go. And now we're going to do this side. To, but not through. And do the same thing again. Uh-oh. This is one of those areas, again, you want to make sure that your fabric does not get ate up by not giving enough coverage over the dog feed so it can move that fabric along. And that has happened to me more times than I want to admit. Okay, and now I have done the same thing on this side. I'm just going to cut these extra threads also, and then I'm going to cut to, but not through. There we go. Okay, so we've done that first step, and then it's telling us to kind of turn this self-facing to the inside. So when you create this top, or when you cut out this top, it had this little extra rounded area, and you are literally taking that and turning it down. And so because you've cut, it will make that easier. Now we are going to be doing some ironing on this part. So I'm just going to turn my iron on so I can be prepared to iron. And we're going to move on to, we're going to put this over kind of to the side a little bit. This is our piece number 3, the front, and I'm going to just fold it, and I'll move it up here, and I'm going to pull out piece number 4, which guess what? I need to also transfer some of those very same markings because we're going to do something similar on this one as well. All right, there we go. So I'll move this number 4 out the way, and I'm actually going to mark this as a 4, just because these two pieces look very similar, and it can be difficult to know what is the front and what is the back. All right, there we go. All right, so we have now cut or stitched the reinforcement stitches in both the front and the back. So then our next step is to pin the back to the front at the overarm edges or the shoulders. So I'm literally going to lay down the front. Oh, and actually, there's another step that I believe that I skipped. So we're going to do that right now, which is on piece number 3. Okay, so that's piece number 4. And that is to stitch down. Let me just take a look at this. That is we're going to turn the self-facing to the inside, which we did do. We did that. We didn't finish it, the step of that. So you're turning the self-facing to the inside. Let me move this number 4 out of the way. I was like, I know this was going too quick. Okay, so you're turning that self-facing to the inside, and which is this little top portion. And then you are going to basically stitch this very small portion that is laid over. You're going to line up those raw edges, and you're going to stitch that part, and it's going to help that lay down. So I am going to just clip this because it's such a small piece. So you're lining up those raw edges. You're going to clip it. And I can't remember if maybe I did need to pin this the first time. I can't remember. But so we're going to try a pin on this side and see how smoothly it goes. But you're lining up that raw edge, and you're going to stitch that very little corner overlap down. And there we go. So we have finished that piece, that step, and now we are laying down. So now this piece is permanently on the front, is permanently kind of stitched down, so to speak. All right, and so now what we are doing is we are going to pin the front to the back at the overarm, so it's right sides together. So here's my front piece laying down, and I'm gonna find the front, my top piece. Oh, right sides together. I'm gonna turn that over. We're gonna line that up. And we're only doing the shoulder seam. And actually, I remember when I did this earlier, it was easier to flip it over because the back is larger than the front. And so you want to be able to just easily see it. So I'm just clipping this, but I am going to flip it over in a minute. And when you are lining up those edges, you are literally going to line up that entire edge. It should fit perfectly. Okay, so I'm just going to turn this over. And you'll see what I mean by it fitting perfectly. Because again, on the front, you stitched those little corners in, and you tucked in that circular overlap, or the facing is what it is. And so it leaves that kind of that little edge out, and you're going to clip that. It'll line up perfectly. Those two clipped edges, which is one end is the top of the shoulder seam, and the other end is the meets up with the armhole, and it will just fit perfectly in there. And then you are going to, so you're going to take this, the open piece or the facing from the back, and you're going to flip it over. You're going to flip it over, and then you're going to have that little edge. There's going to be that little edge that you didn't sew down. You are going to stitch that into the shoulder seam. So you have one on each side. There's like again a little, so you're kind of creating a little bit of like a burrito. You're flipping that over. So it's going to look similar to this. It's flipped over. You'll have that little edge that you're going to line up with the shoulder seam, and you're going to stitch straight down that shoulder seam on each side. And that was a little tricky for me to figure out from the instructions. And so even this time, as I was trying to remember, what did I do? But that is what I did. And so as you're watching this, if you decide to sew it and you have any questions, definitely leave a comment, because I will definitely help provide some additional clarity around this step. So I'm going to stitch this at 5/8. Again, I'm going to make sure that as I stitch this top portion that I am lining it up and there's no overlap or bunching. And again, sometimes you have to hand wheel that needle, lift that foot, straighten everything out, and then you can keep going. I'm going to do a little bit of a back stitch, and there we go. That side is done. And now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. And there we go. And so now I'm going to show you what that looks like when you turn it right side out. And we're going to have to turn it back on this side, but I do just want to show you how that front part now, how it creates that nice facing. And it's a little bit hard to see because my fabric has so much colors in it, but it does just create a nice seal to that top. It's like a fold over that's permanently fixed. So you don't really have to do anything. It's just permanently fixed. And so if you're able to see this, you can kind of see how it just is permanently fixed in there. And so you don't have a seam, you don't have to do any stitching. It's just in there because it has that facing that you have now stitched down. So it is great. It is great. And I feel like, oh, this one I may have left that stitch out a little bit, but easily fixable. Okay, so here we go. And now I'm going to turn this back to the wrong side, because guess what? The next step is we are going to be stitching the side seams. And these side seams will be stitched at 5/8 because we're going to be using that seam allowance to create a casing for the elastic for the ruching. And so this is another area where you have some options for some flexibility. I chose to create the ruching, but it is not a must. You definitely can decide to just do the stitching at 5/8, hem your bottom, and you'll be fine. You can leave that unruched. But I love the ruching. It definitely adds something, but it does give more of a crop. So just be aware that here's what that ruching looks like. I'll bring it a little bit closer so you can see. It is. It creates this higher area on the side. And if you prefer not to have that, or you prefer, a smaller midriff, definitely add more elastic. Don't have it ruche as much or eliminate it altogether. So now that I have clipped those side seams, I am going to stitch. And here we go. So the next part is to open up the shirt so that the side seams are facing up. And we are actually going to create a casing for each of these side seams. And then we're going to create 4 casings. And so what I did the first time is I actually used pins to help me pin down the casing. I put like 4 pins in just to help me again create that casing. You're going to create 2 casings on the right side and 2 casings on the left side by pinning down that seam allowance and then stitching 1/4 inch. So just basically a narrow stitch because you want to be able to fit your 1/4 inch elastic in that side. So this is where if you have an edge stitch foot, it would be very helpful in stitching the seam allowance down. It also does help to iron, which I'm not doing, but it does help the seam allowance lay down. Mine is laying down pretty good. I'm not too concerned. Okay, so I am actually using an edge stitch foot. And what I'm doing is just lining my edge up, but then going into where I can create a very narrow stitch. I'm just going to measure, where is it going to be? There we go. That's pretty good. And take your time with this. You don't have to rush through. The most important thing, one, is that the stitch can be seen from the right side of the garment, so you don't want to have a really uneven stitch. You want it to be fairly straight. But you also want to make sure that you get that seam allowance in there, that you don't have a lot of bunching. And so in order to do that, you want to take your time. You, at this point, have created a pretty awesome garment. And you don't want to mess it up at the end by kind of rushing through this portion of it. So depending on the fabric that you have, your thread may match perfectly and you won't see it. Or you may be like me, you have this very colorful fabric where the thread matches some, but not all of the colors on the front. And so you will see it. All right, so I finished one side and now I am flipping to go to the other side. And then I will repeat these same steps on the opposite side of the garment. I am going to stitch the other side in the exact same way that I have stitched that side, which is fold down that seam allowance. So I am literally doing the same thing on the opposite side. So I'm going to take those same 4 pins. I'm going to pin those pieces down. Creating the casing for the elastic. And now I'm going to take that right over to the sewing machine. And again, I mentioned this earlier, that it is helpful to press those seams flat. It will help them lay flat, make it a little bit easier, especially if you have a fabric that is not laying. That's not really the case with the fabric that I have. It does pretty much lay. It doesn't, I'm not having any difficulty with it. But I will be pressing this at the end to seal all of my stitches, flatten all my seams. And let's see. And continue stitching, making sure that I take my time and that I'm no bunching. None of those things are happening as I am stitching this. And I'm going to go with the back stitch, and then I'm done with that part. So one down, one side down, and now I'm going to literally do the same thing on the other side. And that is it. That is done. And so the next step is don't turn it right side out. Keep it right side in. The very next step is that you should have cut 4 pieces using pattern piece number 5. I found 3 of my pieces, and here's my 4th. And you are, in this case, you can definitely use a safety pin if you have one that you think will get in there. I'm not too sure mine will, but I do have this looper, which you basically loop one edge into this hook, close that hook, and you are going to again fish it up. And what I like to do is put a little clip at the bottom because I know the clip is way too big to make it through. It's not going to make it through. And sometimes you can even clip it to the piece at the end, because you will be so one of the challenges with the looper is that I'm going to make sure it doesn't come off. So let me see. One of the things I need to get are smaller safety pins, because sometimes my safety pins do not, and in this case, that's not the issue, it is going through. But sometimes the piece is too small and it just will not make it through. Okay, so I've made this one through. And you're going to repeat that 4 times because you're going to pull each one of those 4 pieces through. Again, I'm going to put a clip on one end, put my safety pin through the other end, and I'm going to push it right up, right through. And you'll see it's all, as you push it through, you see it kind of already starting to create that ruching effect on the sides. Again, it is just, I think it's just adorable. Okay, and I'm just going to clip that to the end here. And this is where actually it might be better to use a pin to stick through these pieces, because you do have to go to the sewing machine and stitch the edges of these pieces. And so again, the smaller the elastic, the more ruching that you are likely to have. The longer the elastic, the less ruching that you will have. So I did cut mine according to pattern piece number 5. I didn't add any inches or subtract any inches from it. But if you want, again, less of your side showing or less ruching, you should definitely make a longer piece of elastic, or just eliminate using the elastic altogether. Okay, so I have pinned it so that I can then go to the sewing machine and stitch a straight stitch right across the top of these pieces. Again, you want to make sure that there's no bunching, that it's laying flat. And I am doing that right now. It is a single piece of elastic. Single piece of fabric, rather. And I'm going to go back. I'm going to do like a front stitch and a back stitch and another front stitch. And guess what? Another back stitch. And then I'm going to cut that. And that is a done deal. And now I'm going to do the bottom. Same type of situation. Here again, I am taking the very bottom of this, lining these 2 bottom pieces up. And again, this is where it might be helpful, as I did at the top, to take a safety pin and go through both of the pieces to kind of hold them in place. Oh, did I lose my elastic here? Okay, and now that I have that kind of stabilized, I'm gonna again make sure that I have one single piece. of fabric that encompasses both the edges, and I'm going to do a stitch across. And we go back. And that is it. We've finished the ruching on one side. It is pretty stable. We don't have to worry about that. You can't really see it that well, but it is there and it looks very good. I'm very happy with it. All right, now to the other side. All right, we have completed the ruching on both sides, and that leaves us with one final step, excluding the hemming, which would take place. This is the very last step. You would hem the bottom, and that is creating or finishing the armholes. And so again, this is like that. Oh, let me put that back in. And you're going to do that by applying bias tape along the armhole. And so the easiest way that I have done that is I start at the ruching, and I am literally, well, first of all, if there's any exposed elastic, I do cut that off because it's thick and will make it hard for your bias tape to evenly fold down. But you're going to start pinning that bias tape. And I do use pins for this as well. It's just easier. I wouldn't know how you would actually use a clip to hold this down. But you start taking that bias tape. And so the way that I've put the bias tape on is I have the garment right side out. And the bias tape is, the opening is facing out, but I am applying it by laying it on the inside. So the wrong side of the armhole is facing the opening of the bias tape is the easiest way for me to describe how I am putting it on. And so that first stitch that I will be doing will be with the wrong side of the fabric. So basically the right side is facing up. And that allows me to, when I fold over the bias tape, I will be creating a stitch, one single stitch. You only see one single stitch because the outside of the bias tape will just have that one finishing narrow stitch. So I'm hoping that I have enough bias tape in this little piece that's left. Otherwise, I'll have to open up and hold it back. But it looks like I will have enough. And I love the way that this bias tape just adds a very finished look. Just adds such a nice finished look to the garment. And yeah, I do have enough. I have enough bias tape to finish this one single armhole, so I'm very happy about that. And here we go, and just repin this piece so that it is laying flat. That's the other thing, you want it to lay nice and flat. I also lay the bias tape so that the fabric is just below the fold. It's just below the fold so that it can fold over. If you have it too close to the fold, it doesn't fold over nice and neatly. So I have it so that the fabric is just below the fold. I also have it so that it overlaps, you know, when I'm ending it, it overlaps just a little bit. And I cut it on a slant, or a bias, I guess I would say. When I am ending it, I cut it on a little bit of a slant. Okay, so that's going to be great. And I just usually just clip the two pieces together so that when I stitch, I know that they are equally lined up perfectly. All right, so I have that on. I go right under, again, another great opportunity to use your edge foot. Making sure again that your fabric is laying just below the fold of the bias tape. Find your start point, remove your needle, And again, make sure you have everything lined up where you feel comfortable that it is where it is. And I'm going to also make sure that I have this stitched in here. Adjust my needle where it's going to land. This is again another place where I like to get in there and see like where is this going to stitch. And there we go. And there we go. Made a full circle around. And now the next step is to just fold it over. And we're going to do, once you fold it over, and I just use some clips to hold it in place. Once you fold it over, then you are going to just do a nice top stitch in there. And you want to make sure also like where the bias tape folds over each other, that it lines up perfectly, which is great. Gives it a very finished look. All right, move those pins to the side. And I'm going to again go back in here and I'm going to create a very narrow stitch right at the edge. I'm going to start right here. Again, making sure that any extra fabric that you have is just a single layer. You don't want any bunching. And I keep mentioning this because we are we're doing a circle, and just over there a little bit. It is perfect. It is on there. It's perfect. One arm down and one to go. And I usually clip off all these little ends at the end. Okay. And then we're going to repeat this on the other side. And so with that, I'm going to wrap up this other side. And I am going to clip this end so that it is, there we go, at an angle. I feel like it lays better when it is at an angle. Personal preference there. Again, just pinning that bias tape. I start under the arm so that the connection or the overlay is right under the arm. And I'm just pinning that fabric. Oh, wait a minute. I think I'm doing this the wrong way. I am. Here we go. Again, you want to make sure that the wrong side of the fabric is sitting under the fold of the bias tape, but facing down. So the ruching, one of the reasons I can see why they don't bring it all the way to the top is because of the bias tape and allowing it to lay flat. It will lay flatter without the elastic going to the top, because that ruching does create a little bit of bulk, but it is not anything that, again, I was able to get it to lay fairly flat. Not a big concern. But I do want to just bring that up because that is something that I adjusted by bringing the ruching all the way to the top, and it does not do that in the instructions. So it is clear to me why they don't do that. So I just want to share that piece of information. So again, I'm stitching the fabric on below the fold line of the bias tape. There we go. We are done. And there we go. We have finished the top with the exception of the hemming. And the top is finished and the bottom is finished. And so I am going to post either a video or pictures of the finished look. so that you will be able to see. I'll finish the hemming so that you'll see what that looks like. I'll do the same type of hem at the bottom of the shirt that I will do at the bottom of the skirt. Here, I basically just did a fold under 1/2 inch, and I did a zigzag stitch because it is a horizontal stitch. So I will be doing zigzag stitch for the bottom of the shirt and the bottom of the skirt. And so definitely stay tuned. If I don't add the pictures to this video, I will post a video and link this video with the finished look. So thank you so much for joining me for the shirt and the skirt of Simplicity 9757. Thank you so much.